but we definitely know that some of them went to Edessa, and we have this reference from Sebios who talks about them garrisoning themselves in Edessa, having been evicted from the Holy Land by the Sassanians, who prevent their access to Jerusalem at this point. And I think this is also where we get some ideas about in the Quranic references to the Quraysh preventing the pilgrims from going to the Al-Masjid al-Haram on their pilgrimage. Then they're prevented by these. Sorry, there's a standard Islamic narrative about the idea that they were prevented from getting to Mecca by the Quraysh, and so, not the Mecca, to get to the Kaaba, the shrine, by the Quraysh. They were not letting them in, and I think that's where this idea comes from. They evicted them, and then they prevented them from coming back to Jerusalem. So at this time, we have no. It's a little bit later. It's the following year, 619, is when Emperor Heraclius decides to start his campaign to go against the Persians, and he starts marching from Byzantium across Anatolia to start making his way towards his objective is to get to Babylon and to overthrow Khosrau. That's what he's doing. But it takes a long time for him to do that. It's a 10-year campaign, but he starts his 10-year campaign at about this time, and he's looking for allies along the way. So we have a standard Islamic narrative reference that while he was making his progress into the Middle East, that a delegation sent from the father of Muawiyah. Muawiyah is a very famous king of the Arabs, and the father of Muawiyah is called Abu Sufyan, and Abu Sufyan is sent in a delegation to Heraclius, and Heraclius interviews them. He wants to know about the religion of the Arabs and he's heard about a king of the Arabs who he's interested in making an alliance with, and he gets some information from Abu Sufyan, and Abu Sufyan says when he leaves that he says the cause of Ibn Abi Kabsha has become conspicuous. Now it's usually assumed that Ibn Abi Kabsha is a reference to Muhammad, but I think it's not. I think it's actually a reference to that person I mentioned who was a successor to Nu'man III ibn Thabit. The first Nu'man III was the king of the Lakhmids, the last Nasrid king. Now Nu'man III had been imprisoned by Khosrau, and Khosrau had appointed a new leader for the Arabs in that area, and the leader is called Iyas ibn Qabisa. And at the same time as Iyas ibn Qabisa was appointed by Khosrau, we have information that the Arabs themselves didn't like Iyas ibn Qabisa, and they preferred somebody called Hani ibn Qabisa. Now, they both have the same name, the same family name, Ibn Qabisa, which means they may be from the same tribe. And there may have been some tribal rivalry between them. But the local Arabs preferred Hani, and Khosrau preferred Iyas. So Ibn Abi Kabsha may be a reference to the Qabisa family, and Abu Sufyan is saying the cause of Ibn Abi Kabsha has become conspicuous, meaning even Heraclius has heard about it, is an indication that this family was the important ruling family at that time. And later, the standard Islamic narrative interprets this hadith as being a reference to Muhammad, but I don't think it is. I think it's a reference to this family, and I think that this is a semi-historical record of Heraclius's interest in this powerful family, because he knows that there's a conflict in this family. There's a conflict between Hani ibn Qabisa and Iyas ibn Qabisa. Iyas is on the side of the Persians, and maybe Heraclius is interested in seeing whether he can get Hani onto his side in his alliance to go to war against Khosrau. That's his plan. I think that's what's going on here.
Okay, so we are then between the year, 619 is when Heraclius starts his campaign. Mm-hmm. He actually ends up reaching Jerusalem. Is in the year 629, around that time?
Yes, that's right. It takes a long time, okay. But he starts his campaign, he starts to get his allies, and in the process of getting allies, he actually as it says in another hadith, he actually changes religion briefly.
Yeah. So while he's actually going on that campaign, and he goes through his whole arc of transformation back and forth, during those 10 years, what is happening with the Sadducee Karaites that had been expelled from Jerusalem in 618 or so? What are they doing during that period?
We don't have the exact date of when it happens, but Sebios tells us that that Heraclius in his campaign going across from Byzantium across Anatolia towards Syria and Iraq and eventually to Babylon, that he comes across these Jews. It must be early on in his campaign because they're in Edessa, which is in Anatolia. He comes across these Jews in Edessa and he kicks them out. He basically says, your place is in the desert, off you go. And Sebios tells us that these Jews run away to Tajikistan, which refers to Mesopotamia or the Roman province of Orientalis. And in Tajikistan, they try to make an alliance with the Arabs they find there. They're called Ishmaelites, and they basically say, look, you're from Ishmael, and we're from Isaac. We're cousins. We should be together. Let's go and fight together to take back the Holy Land from the Romans. And the Ishmaelites refuse. And it mentions that they tried to persuade them, and they failed. So the initial leader of the Arabs at this time is, as I said, probably they're not going to go back to Khosrau. Khosrau doesn't like them, and they're not going to. They can't side with Heraclius. Heraclius has just kicked them out, so they have to be going to a group of neutral Arabs, and that's probably this Hani ibn Qabisa group of Arabs in Orientalis, who are at this point neutral. Heraclius wants to be on their side, and these Edessan Jews want to be on their side. So we can assume that there's a large number of these Arabs. They have a big kingdom, and that would be the Lakhmid kingdom, which is going all the way down the Gulf. Okay, from this point in Orientalis, going all the way down the Gulf. So both Heraclius and these Jews are trying to impress these Arabs. At first, these Jews from Edessa don't succeed in making any progress with them. So the leader at that time is Hani ibn Qabisa. But we hear that that Khosrau, sorry, not Khosrau, that Heraclius actually succeeds in making some kind. He converts, and he converts to this religion after he speaks to a representative called they call him the Asefali, which means it means like a low church, a Baptist type Christian, and they call him a monophysite, a Severian, which refers to a type of monophysite or miaphysite belief. But they have no patriarchate, they have no bishops, they have no archbishops, they have no metropolitans, they have no patriarchs. They're called Asefali, or Akefali means headless. They have no head. So he talks to this headless representative headless baptized believers, and who is presenting a Miaphysite point of view, and he converts. He adopts their position for 10 years, and that is throughout the entire campaign that Heraclius wages against the Persians until he conquers Persia. He adopts this position, which he calls monoenergism, one energy. It's a way of referring to Miaphysitism before we got the acceptable term Miaphysite. There were several ways of referring to Miaphysitism before the acceptable term Miaphysite was adopted, and every earlier term for it, whether that was monophysite or monoenergist, it was or henophysite. These were abolished as heresies by the Roman Church. But briefly, Heraclius abandons Diophysitism, which is the standard religion of the Roman Church. He abandons that. He becomes an apostate from that, and he adopts this Miaphysite position for 10 years throughout his entire campaign until he conquers Persia, and then he immediately turns his back on it and rejects it. So it's very interesting at that time.
Yes. Just before we move on, that this is as well like going on a tangent, but there was a specific verse in the Quran that was actually doing my head in. There is, I think, Surah 9, verse 31, 32, one of those, the one that says they have taken their rabbis and monks as lords apart from Allah and the Messiah. Now, on that one, what actually got my attention is that it says the rabbis. It's like, fine, so we know who rabbis are, but then it says monks. I thought, well, if that was talking about, say, the Catholic Church, for instance, it would probably say priests, but monks is not like the highest thing. I mean, it could have been just the lingo from back then, but then in another place in the Quran, it does say the closest people to God or to understanding God, something like that, is the Nasara, because they have priests. They actually use that word, priests and monks, and they are not arrogant. So you have those two different verses in the Quran. One of them says like, well, the priests and their monks are fine, but then on the other one, it actually mentions monks like on a very different light. So I was actually wondering whether that verse from Surah 9, it referred to a particular religion that they don't have a hierarchical structure, just like you have said about a headless, say, movement, where you have preachers, but you don't have, say, a bishop, an archbishop, whatever it is. It's just, these monks. So I think it's very much on a tangent, but it really caught my attention that on that verse, it said rabbis and monks, as opposed to rabbis and priests, which probably would make more sense, at least to me.
Well, the two words which are used actually in that verse, it's Surah 9, verse 31. And the word for which is translated as rabbis is ahbarhum, their rabbis, ahbarhum. And the word which is translated as monks is it actually means and their monks is wa ruhbanhum. Ahbarhum and ruhbanhum. So ahbar and ruhban. And ahbar and ruhban doesn't really sound like rabbi or anything like that. But ruhban sounds a bit like monk. The word for monk in Syriac is rabban, which is the same as rabban in it means a great rabbi in Hebrew, in Judaism as well. Rabbonim are the great rabbis. So so ruhban actually sounds like monk. The ruhban, which is translated as monk, actually sounds like rabban. But as for ahbarhum, it doesn't sound like anything. There's nothing really it sounds like. But it's translated as rabbis, and that's just standard Islamic narrative. But it does refer to some kind of leaders. And this passage is criticizing the Nasara, which is usually translated as Christians, and Yahud, which is usually translated as Jews. But I think that both groups are a kind of a Judaic group, and it's referring to two kind of heretical Judaic groups. Ahbarhum and Ruhbanhum refer to the two kinds of leaders. But I think the key point which you've got there is that there is a criticism of these hierarchical structures or church structures with the patriarchs and the metropolitans and the archbishops, etc. So definitely the Quran is written from the point of view of like an acephalic group who are not really interested in that kind of church hierarchy. So I think you've got a very key point there. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So where should we carry on from?
Well, let's see, just to almost like recap a bit. So we are around, say, the 620s, and Jerusalem is being really fought over between the Persians and the Byzantines, like for the most part. But then you have the group of Jews who had been expelled, and now they're being expelled from Edessa again. So now you have a third group that says, hey, hang on a minute. So now we are going to have either the Byzantines or the Persians in Jerusalem, but it should be us. So they try to find a way to go back and reconquer Jerusalem, and they go to the Arabs. So now we don't have just, say, the Persians and the Byzantines, but we have the Persians, the Byzantines, the Jews who want to actually go back there. And now they involve the Lahmeds, and everything is about to explode. Something like that.
Well, we can say that the 620s, which is what we're talking about right now, is a very. I think we could compare it to the modern situation, which just concluded in Syria, where it was really chaotic, and it's very difficult to understand what's going on, who's doing what, who's allied to who, and what are the alliances, and who is it worthwhile being allied to. It was a very complex situation. But certainly Heraclius wanted them on his side. Clearly, these Jews wanted them on their side, and clearly Khosrau was also trying to court them as well. There are at least three groups trying to court this Lakhmid kingdom. Khosrau is trying to do it through Iyas ibn Qabisa. According to the hadiths, Heraclius is interested ibn Abi Kabsha, which I think is Hani ibn Kabisa, or at least the Kabisa family in general. And certainly these Jews are interested in this area too, but they're not making any progress.
Okay, so if we know that we're in the year 629, and then Heraclius is in Jerusalem. Would you mind to actually explain?
No, I don't want to jump there yet. I think what we need to do very clearly is, first of all, show that Heraclius is successful. He does conquer Persia, and he doesn't do it alone. He doesn't do it without allies. He needs allies for this. And it's very clear that the only reason he changed his religion for this time to this Miaphysitism is because he needed allies. And what happens in this time period, as we start to hear about the first conquest, and the standard Islamic narrative starts to talk about the first conquest, the first victories of the Arabs against the Persians. And the most important point, that's why I didn't want you to jump forward, is this Battle of the Kar. The Battle of the Kar is absolutely pivotal in the rise of the Arabs. The standard Islamic narrative dates this to the year 622, and I see no reason to doubt that this took place in 622. I think that is totally acceptable. I think that there may be a confusion between the Battle of the Kar with other Islamic battles, but certainly the Battle of the Kar is absolutely pivotal. Tabari tells us, interestingly, that the victory of the Battle of the Kar is due to Muhammad, and then like 2 pages later, Tabari tells us that the victory of Battle of the Kar is due to somebody called Hanzala. Which I don't think is an accident on his part. I think he's trying to slip something through underneath the censor's nose. He's trying to be a bit of a historian here, trying to slip something through to us so we can make sense of it. And in this Battle of the Kar, Hani ibn Qabisa's faction defeat Iyas ibn Qabisa's faction and the Persians. They defeat them in the Kar, and they take hold of a significant portion of Mesopotamia. That's really important. And that is absolutely good news. It's really positive news for Heraclius. Heraclius must be absolutely delighted by this, because it means Persia is falling and there are people who are attacking Persia just like he is, and he's definitely going to be very happy about that. So I think it's very possible that Heraclius is of the same religion as Hani ibn Qabisa's people, who are attacking the Persians at the Kar at this point. I think that's very, very positive, a very realistic way of interpreting these passages and seeing this. So there's an alliance. Maybe it's an informal alliance, but there's a religious alliance or an ideological alliance between Heraclius and these people, and they're overthrowing the Persians. But the Jews at this point are not succeeding. They may have joined in the battle to try and ingratiate themselves with these Arabs against the Persians. Certainly they would have a vendetta against Khosrau for turning against them, so they may have joined in, but they are not leaders at this point in the Kar. And we hear in the hadiths that there is actually a point in which these Jews are persecuted by these Arabs. So anyway, that's a very important thing which we mustn't gloss over. The Kar. Okay, now we've got the Kar. We can move on to 629, which you wanted me to talk about. At this point, Heraclius abandons his treaty, abandons his religion with these people. He returns to being basically a Diophysite. He adopts something called monothelitism, which is a Nestorianism. And now Nestorianism is a Diophysite position. So that means he's coming back towards the orthodoxy of the Diophysite Roman Church, even though Nestorians are still like a bit far out there. He is coming back towards the Diophysite position. He's definitely no longer in alliance with these monophysite Messianic believers. He's no longer in alliance with them. And at this point, of course, they would feel betrayed by him. They would feel like he has turned his back on them. And we also hear that Heraclius starts persecuting the monophysite Christians at this point in alliance with the Nestorians and the Parthians. So there is a big sort of backlash from Heraclius, and then he goes and he takes Jerusalem. He takes control of Jerusalem. So that is what happens in 629.
Okay, there's I don't want to actually skip ahead because we're going almost like year by year to see what happens, but actually almost like jumping to within 10 years. Now Jerusalem is going to fall under the command of Umar, which we had discussed before, that he was basically a Sadducee, which then he actually converts to a Messianic movement. But at this point, he is going to be somewhere, probably in Iraq or something like that, and he's going to start his move. But the move that is going to begin now to push against Heraclius is going to be, say, spearheaded by Sadducees, nothing to do with monophysites, or do you think that the movement that goes against Heraclius is because of him changing his belief? What is the
Okay,
or they just don't care? They just want to get Jerusalem, and everybody has their own belief as to why they want Jerusalem.